US dollar hegemony continues to decline more and more by the month. Iran has proposed creating a new currency to do trade with China, Russia, India, Pakistan, and the other members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is not very well known in the West, but this is one of the most important international organizations. It has, among its member states, 40% of the global population and around 1/3, more than 30% of global GDP. This represents a massive block of Eurasia, including the two most populated countries on Earth, China and India, along with the largest country on Earth in terms of land mass, Russia, and Pakistan, which is another massive country. And then other members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization include numerous countries in Central Asia, including Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. So this is extremely important. And Iran is proposing a new currency to do trade with these countries to get around the hegemony of the US dollar. Now, Iran is, of course, under US sanctions. Russia is under brutal US sanctions. China is facing US sanctions. Those sanctions are illegal according to international law because they are unilateral. They are referred to in international law as unilateral coercive measures, and they were not approved by the UN Security Council, which means that they are illegal according to international law. And Iran has been for years trying to find new ways to get around these illegal US sanctions. And one of the ways that it has done so is de-dollarizing. It's using the dollar less in international transactions. Still today, the vast majority of international trade is done in the dollar. And here at Multipolarista, I've done interviews with the economist Michael Hudson discussing how the dollar is used as a financial weapon by the US empire, how the US blocks countries from accessing the US-dominated international financial system, including the SWIFT system for financial payments. It's a financial payment mechanism based in Belgium, but dominated by the US government. And the US government kicked Iran out of the SWIFT system. It has now kicked Russia out of the SWIFT system to try to prevent these countries from being able to do trade internationally and from being able to have their banks connected to the international financial system. So Russia has been trying to find new ways of doing trade. Russia has been doing trade in other currencies, including the Chinese yuan. Russia has been doing trade in the ruble, its own currency. It's even been doing trade with India and the Indian rupee. And similarly, Iran has been doing trade in other currencies. And Iran signed a historic agreement in 2021, a 25-year economic agreement with China, in which Iran will provide oil and China will reportedly provide $400 billion of investment in the Iranian economy and to help build Iranian infrastructure. So all of this is part of a larger project of challenging the dictatorship of the US empire and the US dollar, challenging US dollar hegemony. And now we see that one of the most important international organizations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is potentially moving toward the creation of its own currency. I wrote an article about this at multipolarista.com. You can find it. It's titled, Iran Proposes New Currency for Trade with China, Russia, India, Pakistan, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And here you can see a photo in 2018, and these are the heads of state of the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You can see there are two official languages of the SCO, that they are Chinese and also Russian. And here you can see the members. Those full members are China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. So together, you can see a map here. This represents a huge block of Eurasia, a massive block of the planet. This photo was from 2018. Here is a photo from 2019, and it shows once again leaders and representatives from multiple countries, including Iran. Now, Iran is not officially a full member at the same level as these 8 countries, but in 2021, Iran was accepted to become a full member. Every member voted to allow Iran to come in as a full member, and it began an accession process. An accession process it's a formal diplomatic process that will take 1 or 2 years. So for all practical purposes, Iran is a member, but it is still going through a process of officially becoming a full member. And in early 2022, Iran's foreign minister for economic diplomacy, Mehdi Safari, published a letter in which Tehran said that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization should create a new currency for these Eurasian countries. And this would allow these countries to get around illegal U.S. sanctions and would also be a challenge to the dictatorship of the U.S. dollar. I note in this article that Brazil's left-wing leader, Lula da Silva, former president, who is leading all of the polls for the elections this October to be president of Brazil again, Lula has promised that if he wins the election in October, that he is going to create a new currency for Latin America called the Sur, which means the South. And he said he wants to do that in order to combat, quote, the dependency on the dollar. So we see in multiple regions of the world attempts to de-dollarize, to challenge the dictatorship of the US dollar and the US empire. And I did a video about this. If you want more information about Lula da Silva, about this and past attempts at creating a Latin American currency, you can go to multipolarista.com and you can find the link to the YouTube channel. Or, of course, if you're watching this on YouTube or Rumble or Rockfin or Odyssey, you can find that video. Now, I continue in this article talking about how the Shanghai Cooperation Organization represents more than 40% of the world's population and 1/3 of the global GDP. So this is an extremely important organization. It was first formed in 2001, and it was first formed as a security organization, and it was aimed at promoting stability in Asia, specifically at a time of a lot of extremism, violent secessionist movements, and terrorism. But in the 21 years since it was formed, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has evolved, and it's become more and more economic, with discussions of trade within Eurasia, and political. And as I said, the full members are China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, although Afghanistan, Belarus, and Mongolia are observer states, and Iran was accepted as a member in 2021, and it's still going through that process of officially joining. So Belarus is likely next. Afghanistan is also potentially going to be a new member, and Mongolia. And you can see this map here. It's a massive chunk of the world. Huge part of the world. And yet the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is barely even known of in the West, which really shows how deep Western chauvinism goes. This is such a massively influential organization. On May 26th, the SCO held a forum meeting that was chaired by Russia. And they said that, according to their official press release, they said they discussed ways to increase interaction in terms of security and economic cooperation. So that is very important, economic cooperation. And here at the end of this article, I talked about ways in which the Eurasian powers, led by China and Russia, have been trying to de-dollarize. So we saw that after the devastating Western sanctions imposed on Russia over its military operation in Ukraine, we've seen that Russia and China have been further integrating their economies together. China is buying Russian energy using its own currency, the yuan. China and Russia are integrating their banking systems. Russian banks including state-owned banks and also private banks, are opening savings accounts in the Chinese yuan. Russian banks are now accepting numerous Chinese payment systems, including WePay. These are basically the Chinese versions of Visa and MasterCard, because many of these Russian banks were kicked out of the US-dominated financial system, and they're no longer allowed to issue cards that work with Visa and MasterCard. So we've seen that their banking systems and their economic systems are integrating. They're doing more and more trade together. And I discussed that also India and Russia have created a system of doing trade in the Indian rupee and the Russian ruble. And India also buys a lot of oil at a discount from Russia, and it buys wheat from Russia. So it's doing so in the rupee and the ruble. And another very important aspect of this that I mentioned is that Iran has been de-dollarizing. And in 2020, Iran's central bank basically dropped the US dollar, and it listed the Chinese yuan as its top foreign exchange currency. That's a very big deal. And then, of course, I mentioned that in 2021, China and Iran signed a historic 25-year cooperation agreement. And here's a report in Asia Financial: Iran dumps dollar for yuan from 2020. So we are living in a very interesting historical moment. US dollar hegemony is facing challenges in multiple regions of the world. The US empire is at a moment of serious crisis. And countries in Latin America, as I often discuss, and also Eurasia and Africa, they are all trying to unite to create new institutions to challenge US hegemony and create more economic self-sufficiency and sovereignty for their countries.